Meeting being recorded. So on this note, Xenia, I give you the floor to be able to first introduce Frame the Future. Xenia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Baptiste. It's a great pleasure to co-host this with you here today. So yes, welcome everybody. Welcome Eyewear World. We're very excited. This is our first Frame the Future webinar that we are co-hosting or hosting. And we are here to talk about standards and the launch of product category standards for eyewear. Next. So I'm going to start by introducing who Frame the Future is. We're a totally fresh and brand new organization that is forming as we speak. We are a non-profit alliance, and our aim is to catalyze sustainability in the global eyewear industry. So we want to help the companies in this sector to become more sustainable by collaborating and working together, setting standards and sharing initiatives that make this possible. Next. And I'm going to introduce the people behind Frame the Future. So my name is Xenia Glutz von Blotzheim. I'm a brand and sustainability strategist. And I also hold the role of CSR director at Berlin eyewear company Makita. And my colleague Johanna, please.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. It's super nice to be here together with you today. Yeah, my name is Johanna Skans. And I'm the founder and CEO for a company called Skans. We are a certified B Corporation, and we are offering circular eyewear and sustainability courses for optical retailers. I'm also an optometrist and have also worked for B Lab in the Nordics. And by that, I'd like to hand over to our third co-founder, Andrew.
Good afternoon, and just sweeping in at the last moment there. I met my two fantastic peers from Frame the Future a couple of years ago at the Eyes on Sustainability conference in the UK. I was presenting as an environmental scientist working in optics. I have a background in ecology and environmental management and filmmaking, of all crazy things, and a family history in optics. So I'm pulling together a wide array of different perspectives to be here and delighted to be working with these fantastic people to drive forward sustainability in eyewear.
Thank you. Yeah, next, please. Right. So why are we here? We're here because our industry faces many sustainability challenges, and we dive into them in a study that we published last week, the Catalyst study, and I'm just going to briefly run over them here. So one of the main ones is the lack of standards and data. There's material waste. There's the lack of recycling solutions, very little circularity, and most of all, there's no cross-sector collaboration in the value chain at this moment. And so this is what we are creating. Next. And the moment that we're in now is that eyewear is a growing business, and that's fantastic. But there's also scrutiny, and it's catching up with the sector. So we have regulatory pressure. We have consumers that are showing greenwashing fatigue. We have new regulations like digital product passports who are coming in. And we also have supply chain risk due to sustainability issues. And at this moment here in 2026, we have realized that credibility today is defined by proof and not just by promises. And I hand over to Johanna.
Thank you, Xenia. So we are at a fork in the road, and sustainability is no longer optional. I'm sure all of you are aware of that. But the way we approach circularity is still fragmented for many leaders. So the challenge isn't ambitions. We know that after the study we created, it is how to manage growth without multiplying cost and complexity and risk. So there are two ways forward. The top one is individual action. And usually with good intentions, the process is usually very slow, expensive, complicated, and in the end have little impact. And then the second path is collective action. This is where we share tools and knowledge, and we can scale large-scale impact and achieve system-level innovations. So the question isn't really whether we should align, but more about what happens if we don't. Next, please. So for circularity to truly be successful and work, we need to have the global hat on and emphasize system thinking, because no company can fix these problems by themselves. So there are three areas that need to work together. The first one is circular principles, and this is where we need to have a shared sustainability language. And the second one is we need to have business models working within planetary boundaries. And the third area is measurement. We need to measure so that we are reporting and keeping data on the same things. And where all these three areas are overlapping, that is what we call system change. And that is where real transformation happens. So circularity cannot be achieved by individual companies. It requires shared systems, aligned models, and collective actions. And that is why Frame the Future exists, to enable that change that individual companies cannot achieve alone. Okay, so next, please. So what's needed next? Collective action with shared infrastructure. I mentioned that. But why is alignment so difficult? Because currently in the eyewear industry, we don't have any shared operating layers. We don't have any common standards or practices, or we don't have any aligned tools or measurements. So that is why circularity is difficult to scale. Collective action allows us to move from individual effort to system level efficiency. So with a shared infrastructure, we can build clear standards. We can build a truly collaborative ecosystem, share data and measurements, joint pilots and faster learnings, and also greater credibility and trust. So Frame the Future exists as a neutral infrastructure facilitator or integrator, enabling the eyewear industry to build what no single company can build alone. Next.
And I'll briefly take over to conclude what we're doing next with Frame the Future. Or realistically, first, now that we've finished the study, we are focusing on three particular areas that the study has shown us need some attention. Standards are inconsistent, and so let's make them consistent. Developing product environmental footprint category rules with Baptiste here is probably going to be the most game-changing thing that we can do for eyewear. And it's certainly going to allow all sustainability professionals to be more confident in their data and their claims. And I'm excited to hear more about that in just a few seconds' time. We're also looking at developing the Higg Index for helping people to measure multiple different criteria within the supply chain. And we're looking specifically at enhancing circularity through specific working groups. Next slide, please. So, very quick call to action here of why to join Frame the Future. The pun is very much intended to help frame the future of eyewear. If you, as a member of Frame the Future, you can help us set the standards, shape what comes next, access the shared data that is currently eluding so many of us, and pilots before they scale, and lead. Don't follow, because that's boring as hell. We're change makers. Let's make some change. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Xenia, Andrew, and Joanna, for this presentation. Very much appreciated, and thank you for this call. Now, very briefly about To Be Policy, just to be able to, I'm Baptiste Carrère-Pradal, very happy to hand over and to take it over now to discuss about the PEF. And I'm the Managing Director and co-founder of To Be Policy. We're a consultancy firm helping companies to understand, navigate, and prepare EU and US ESG legislation. And we're facilitating working groups at the intersection of sustainability and legislation, including indeed PEFCR that we have facilitated for various industries. And I will come back on that in a second. And therefore, let's zoom in now to this first point that Andrew mentioned can be one of the most transformative first steps that the industry can be doing together to be able to harmonize how one calculates and measure and shares the environmental footprint of sectors. What we know today as a challenge is that indeed, as was just presented, there is fragmented measuring approach because everybody has their own LCA approach, method, consulting firm. Therefore, that leads to many claims that are made that have very different background and ways of substantiating themselves, making them very often fragile when it comes to review in an era where we know that there is more and more competing authorities, market surveillance authorities, which are monitoring those type of claims and trying to envision how to clean a bit this space moving forward. And there is now indeed a graining pressure regarding new upcoming legislation, may that be the Empowering Consumer Directive, and also a general push to have much better elements to be able to substantiate claim. So from the fragmentation to the proliferation of claim and to the common pressure, therefore that's the current approach that and system in which we are, where indeed the PEFCR provides one of the answers. Before going further, I'm going to be presenting the product environmental footprint. I understand that some of you were in a presentation or had discussed already with Xenia and her colleagues, may that be in Milan or in other places. During this presentation, don't hesitate to ask questions. For that, you have the chat where you want to ask a question. Don't hesitate to raise your hand. And I will be very happy to give you the floor to ask your question. But really, please take this time as a time where the point for you is to leave this meeting understanding what is a product environmental footprint, could that be of interest for you, and to be able to decide for the next step. So definitely take your time. My presentation will not take the next 45 minutes, don't worry. So you are more than welcome to ask any question, raise your hand to make sure that you understand exactly all of those elements. Okay, so that's one of the points. But for instance, now for the person who told me the chat is deactivated, I can see your questions. So the question comes to the panelists and then I can answer them. So please, it works definitely. Just ask your question and then we'll be answering them as they are, or you can answer the question and also raise your hand. So don't hesitate. I saw the question coming from the anonymous who sent the chat is deactivated. Good point there. So therefore, coming back on what is the product environmental footprint. So first, the product environmental footprint today is a EU recommended method, which is aimed at really measuring the environmental footprint of a given product across its entire life cycle. So we talk definitely from the raw material extraction to the manufacturing, distribution, all the classic steps that one will take in order to be able to measure the environmental footprint. But the key difference between all of the other methods today which are existing is that the impact category that one should use are fixed. In the current method, there is 16 impact categories that one has to measure upon and to sort and identify the most material one for a given product. But those impact categories are fixed. The point after is that all the modeling rules are defined in this work, that virtually nothing or as least as possible is left to interpretation. Same will go for the clear data requirement. At the end of the exercise of a PEF, you are told exactly which data do you need to receive from your manufacturers, from your own operations, and from different partners in order to be able to conduct this evaluation. Because at the end, what we want to achieve is something that supports comparability and reproducibility and simplicity. A PEFCR is not an academic exercise. It's meant to create the most simplified LCA, if you wish, while remaining completely relevant and differentiating. So the point always is to ask the minimum number of questions to make it as simple to deploy in a value chain as possible, but yet to still enable you to receive enough information to be able to take decision, build collaboration, and align on next steps to be able to improve the environmental performance of a given sector. That's more or less, in short, the main element of a PEFCR. In order to do that, there is different steps to be able to take. Some of you in this room have actually, or some of the branch of some of you in this room have actually done already PEF. So it's the case, and I will come back on that, on the apparel and footwear sector. So from all of the fashion brands have already a PEFCR, which is up and running since 1 year time. So therefore, all of the PEFs which are created follow one single method, a general of high-level Bible, which is created, which is the EF method, which is exactly telling you which are the impact category one should take, which are the steps that one should take in order to identify the most material and to identify the hotspot, what is a verification process, etc., etc. That's a big element that everybody has to use, whatever PEFCR you are creating afterwards. That's a key EF methodology. And then every sector will create its own PEFCR. So today we are here debating the PEFCR eyewear, but there is other one, I will come back on it, on cosmetic, apparel and footwear, packed water, and other goods which also have their own PEFCR. And then after, there can be a study done for each and individual product. So today we are creating on how to create the PEFCR eyewear out of the general methodology, which is already a set of rules, which is already creating and simplifying a lot the work that needs to happen. So this element was to make sure that we will speak the same language. Other sectors have already taken this journey. I just mentioned the apparel and footwear sector has already taken this journey and actually worked many years to be able to submit to the EU Commission their own PEF. That happened in May 2026, and now there is a small revision taking place that will conclude in May 25, sorry, and now there is a small revision taking place that will be concluding in June 26. To Be Policy and myself were actually leading the work for the apparel and footwear sector. Then there is a tourism sector, which is also creating now their PEF, that is called PEF Hotel and Accommodation, which is also done under the leadership of the EU Commission, which aims at creating indeed a footprint for any type of hotel stay in Europe and technically around the globe. And then there is other sectors which have decided to create PEF-like effort, but which are still exactly following the PEF, even though they're doing that outside of the scrutiny of the EU Commission. So it's a case of the cosmetic sector, which has created the Eco Beauty Score, which is a PEF for all cosmetics created, where again, the entire industry came together to create the Eco Beauty Score, which is now up and running, to be able to measure the environmental performance of each and every product in the cosmetic sector put on the market. Other PEFs have been created also. We have just finished a few weeks ago, one for the ski sector. And technically, any person having and dealing with consumer goods is in capacity to be able to put product on the market moving forward. So that's the type of other sectors which have embarked on it and will carry on embarking moving forward. Ultimately, once a PEFCR is created, the benefits for every player are multiple. One of the few things that clearly will be done is when you work on a PEFCR, you clearly define a scope. By a scope, that means that, for instance, what's inside and what can apply this PEFCR or not. Roughly here, even though that will be one of the first deliverables of those working group, we can imagine there can be within the scope one for the ophthalmic eyewear, one from the sunglasses, potentially one from the sport glasses. What about intelligent glasses and others? That will be the conversation regarding the scope. Typically, maybe products which are different, like personal protective equipment, or which are only answering this need, or lenses could be taken out of scope. That's a conversation to have regarding what scope of the conversation do we want to have. Then it comes about the functional unit that has to be fixed for everybody. Typically, to serve its purpose, to protect or to correct one person's eyes for 1 year, or to protect one person's eye from the sun from 1 year. So we need to identify clear functional unit that will be the basis of the measurement of the environmental footprint. And then after, in this work, we'll all identify for everybody the key assumption that everybody will have to follow and to apply in order to create a PEFCR. Like what are the main steps that one has to take into account in order to model some life cycle stages. All that will be discussed by everybody. And then will come the question that I mentioned earlier about the mandatory data that one need to gather in order to calculate a PEF. In this particular case, when you create a PEFCR, you define clearly which are the data that one must have in order to be able to create an environmental footprint according to a PEFCR. Clearly, bill of material, country of production, sorry, and other points can be asked in order to be able to calculate this footprint and will be needed in order to do so moving forward. And then there will be the question about under which condition can you compare the performance of given classes. That's a key point that will be done here in order to be able to ultimately ensure that we can have a guidelines to enable one to say what one needs to say that you are more sustainable than the average, that you are more sustainable than classic industry practices. Once one creates a PEFCR, you create so-called average products that could be the base of future comparison. But that's also a conversation that the industry will have globally that will follow, of course, not only the PEFCR, but having an eye on current legislation to be able to ensure that ultimately there can be some recommendation about what can be said or not regarding the relative performance of one product environmental footprint versus another. All of that is part of the PEFCR. Within PEFCR, there is many other points that will be discussed, and this is just a quick screenshot of some of the key output of PEFCR that one will have at the end of the journey. Important to have in mind also that PEFCR in itself are long documents to be able to classify and to measure the environmental footprint. In every sector, what happens is that those documents are taken on board by different service providers, solution providers, environmental footprint providers, to be able ultimately to translate that into a tool for all the players to be able to implement. So you should not imagine that you will have to dive into the PEFCR to create the document and to create the footprint yourself. That's something that very often, as we witness in other sectors and industries, service providers will be doing in order to ensure that this is properly deployed moving forward. Now the question of the PEFCR creation. And again, as I said, don't hesitate to ask your question as we move forward to be able to make sure in the Q&A segment that we can answer them moving forward and answer all of the questions that you may have emerging from today's call. In order to create a PEFCR, there is a few things that one has to do. The first thing is to create a technical secretariat. The technical secretariat is the body that actually everybody that will be creating this common method. It's made of very different organizations. It's made of indeed brands and retailers that will be each sharing different information. Brands may have a particular interest because ultimately they will be the one evaluating the environmental performance of their product. Retailers may have a secondary interest because first they may sell their own brands, but also because they will be interested into communicating about the environmental performance of the different brands that they are supplying themselves, or because they also may have to report in a standardized way regarding the footprint of the product they are selling in their own retail operations. Then in any PEFCRs, normally we also welcome different manufacturers to join because they will have intimate knowledge of the different steps and processes which are happening at different stage to be able to evaluate better the hotspot of the sector and the environmental performance and the modeling of each of the sector. That can be the case about the lens manufacturer, the frame manufacturers, different material suppliers that can be part of this technical secretariat. In other instances, we can also imagine to have different industry association and representation that can come on board to bring always different perspective within those conversations. The key element is within a technical secretariat to actually have a lot of organizations to be able to participate in this meeting and to be able to bring their different expertise to this conversation. There is a facilitator to ensure that the governance is followed and that the conversation is running as smooth as possible all along the way. That will be project managing the conversation to ensure a timely delivery of the PEFCR. And in order to do and to support this work, there is very often an LCA expert which is coming in to be able to bring technical advisors where needed. There can be a tool provider that can come and provide therefore a tool to enable brands, retailers, and any other body to be able to simulate the work as it's moving forward, and any other expert that can be identified in this conversation to be able to work and to ensure that there is a proper conclusion and all of the expertise is on board to ensure that the output is as robust as possible. People normally will be joining the technical secretariat at launch of this PF work. Then there is a small time and a small time frame in which other parties can join up to the moment that the participation in the technical secretariat closes. That's due because the process of creating a PFCR, typically taking, let's say, 2 years or 2 years and a half from the beginning to the complete closure. If people join too late in the process, we don't want to revisit earlier conversation. So normally, let's say during the first 6 months, sometime there can be a window and then the topic close and we move forward with the actual participant of the technical secretariat. And then once we have this technical secretariat, the work can start. The work can start if we pilot on a 2-year project. Initially, what one does is to anticipate the scope of the product category. In this case, as we'll see in the next step, we'll do that a bit earlier to be able to already pre-anticipate the work before we actually do the formal kickoff. And then after, once we have identified the different product categories, we start to identify and to create representative product. Typically, if we identify that a product category is sunglasses that we include in this work, we'll identify a typical sunglasses. Multiple pathways exist. We can take an actual product and go in a shop and say, this is the average sunglasses, and all of the sunglasses will be measured compared to this one because it's what we consider average. Or we can create what we call a Frankenstein product, a virtual sunglasses, which is assembled of multiple parts virtually, but representing the medium practice of the sector regarding the building of sunglasses. And from this one, we can identify all the different hotspots of the sector and what are the main type of data we need and all of the different assumptions that will allow us to create the first draft of the PEFCR. This first draft after is then given back to all of you to be able to create what we call the supporting studies. During the supporting studies, you will virtually pilot, if you want, or use this prototype to try the PFCR with a few products in your range, with actual product in your range. This is an extremely important time in the journey because then we can check the validity of every assumption we've made before. We can confirm that we are on the proper track, that the primary data needed are actually accessible, and we can test a varied amount of information. These normally supporting studies are then cross-check verified by a third-party entity to be able to ensure the validity of this work. Depending on the work, we can do a redo of this, meaning we can do a second draft and a different conversation. This will depend on the time, the budget, and the different requirements. But if we stick to a linear approach, then after the different supporting study, we also have stakeholder consultation. During this element, virtually, we enable anybody in the sector to be able to read the work which has happened and to provide feedback on it, to tell that maybe there is an aspect that we have underestimated, or quite the contrary, one that we give way too many importance, or something that actually doesn't fly or doesn't work, that we have to revisit collectively. And this is when we do all of this work that then we are able to update and revisit earlier assumption to create a final PFCR that then is happening. And there will be pathways which are prepared currently to be able to ultimately, at the end of the journey, also to submit back this PFCR to the EU Commission to have it officially stamped and approved. This will be also closed by the EU Commission in June of 2026 to enable this process normally, but that's also something that we will aim by this work. So it's definitely a lot of iteration that will take place over the courses of 2 years to be able to end up with a final PFCR. Typically, in order to be able to do that, there is different way. Is that we ensure that once we have created a PFCR, at the end of the way, you all have a proper way to evaluate which is the most impactful step into the building of a glass and an eyewear. And so that we have a common way to be able to measure this environmental performance. That after paves the way to much more collaboration in order to identify different pathways of improvement for the industry. By having also a authority sanction method that can support brand credibility when it comes to communication of environmental performance for the one who so wish, or for communication of other elements regarding to other pieces of legislation that could leverage PEFCR. And ultimately, for anybody interested in doing LCA, that clearly reduces the cost of the LCA and can support, in some cases, also indeed answering to tenders which was the case also of the medical sector and the pharmaceutical sector, who created their own PEFCR to be able to have a common way to answer also questions that they were receiving from the authorities when we come to medical devices and other elements. So there is a varied element of different support and benefit that people can have by creating this PEFCR. And by therefore launching and creating also and joining this Eyewear PEFCR, what you can do is that, of course, by being in the seat, you can influence the different conversations which are taking place and the different methods to make sure that the output is as clean as possible. And therefore, that allows to share the cost between many different entities to be able to come to create this common approach. Cost that after you can recoup quickly by having a capacity to create at a very, very lesser cost environmental calculation for any product without having to undergo a full LCA of every product, which today is the approach when there is no common approach, standardized method for a given sector. That also ensures a pathway for collaboration between the different players and indeed ensure proper acceptance of the output, because then it's based on a robust method which is validated by the Commission. And after that prepares also for any potential requirement of legislation that may emerge in the future regarding communication or requirement regarding footprints of the different products. So far, we've worked on a tentative timeline to be able to move forward and to be able to work, which is the idea to say that today on the 17th of March, we are creating this webinar to be able to inform you of the first steps of the launch of this PEFCR, and then to be able to already agree to save the date for a meeting that will take place on the 19th of May, to be able to have initial conversation with the different parties regarding the scope of the conversation. That will leave us after, during the summer, to refine the scope and carry on building the consumer base and the user base to be able to reach the 27th of September, where we plan to have in Paris during a conference, a meeting to be able to have a meeting in person to be able to move forward with the scope. And sorry, I was reading the first question in the Q&A, so keep making sure that you can ask your question. We will be answering each of them in a few minutes when we close this presentation. That will leave after this meeting on the 27th of September, that will be organized by Frame the Future, a meeting and an official launch that will take place in January. Meaning that today we are initiating this work to be able to make sure that during the next cursus of the next month, we take time to be able to gather information regarding the scope. From there also we can derive properly the budget that will be needed, refine all of that during the summer with all of you, freeze all of this in September, and give time after by the end of the year to validate the budget internally to make sure that we can actually have the first kickoff proper meeting with all the signatories in January of next year. So those are the steps of the process, and we'll make sure to, together with the recording of today's meeting, we'll have actually the also date and invite for the first meeting on the 19th of May, which is today still. You are free to join. It's not because you joined the 19th of May that we'll be asking money or anything. Don't worry. You can join directly, and then we'll carry on and progress. But it's very important for us to actually have the first actual workshop on the 19th of May to move forward with a scope discussion and to refine that over the summer. So those are the next steps. So please, I will stop now the recording to be able to enable the Q&A section, and you are welcome to ask any question that you see fit. So I received already a question like, what is the purpose of the representative product for each product category, and how do you deal with this? Because there are many different types of eyewear, injection, molded, acetate, metal that have different footprint. Very good question. So as I mentioned, the purpose of the representative product is initially to identify the hotspot of the sector. So to identify indeed what place in the process and other elements have the highest footprint. We aim in the PEF to capture 80% of the footprint of a product. Meaning that indeed it's a kind of the 20/80 rule. So we want to be able to make sure that we capture the data that enables to have 80% of the perspective of a product. And therefore, there is two, and from there, after you calculate your hotspot, you calculate your data need, which data do you need to capture. And also the second purpose of the representative product is to enable comparison. in another sector, for instance, the apparel and footwear sector. And again, there is some people in your in the call which have also belong to holding company which have significant apparel segment. There is a law which is being prepared with a proposition of legislation. It's called the Eco-Design Regulation, requires that the comparison is made according to the representative product of the category. So that's the element which is happening today. So that's two, or for instance of purpose of the representative product. And then your second question about how to deal with this, because there are many different types of eyewear, injection molded, acetate, metal, that have different footprints. And that's where comes the question about either to take one particular eyewear or to take what I call a Frankenstein product. If, for instance, the idea is that there is so much variety, you create a virtual eyewear, which is made virtually of, I'm making figures up, I don't know the figures. Let's say in the industry, an average sunglasses is made, 30% of the market is made of metal, 70% is made, 60% is made of acetate, etc., etc. Then you create a virtual product made of the percentage of metal, which is the average, the percentage of acetate, which is the average, etc., etc. And that creates an average product, which technically indeed doesn't exist, but to encompass the diversity of the sector. And from thereafter, you derive the average. That's what happened, for instance, coming back to the apparel and footwear, just as a piece of reference, where initially there were way too many material in one given product. So therefore, there was a virtual product created which had a bit of silk, a bit of linen, a bit of cotton, a bit of polyester, a bit of nylon, a bit of locell, etc., which doesn't exist indeed, but that allowed us to encompass the entire complexity of all of the value chain, from organic value chain to industrial value chain, from all the different process in one given case. I hope, Anonymous, I answered your question. Don't hesitate to answer and to ask more questions if you need to. Then, thank you, Christelle, for your question. What kind of tool is used for PEFCR draft and final version? I'm not sure I get your question. Don't hesitate to retype it as I try to answer it in case I'm not properly touching upon it. Virtually, when you create a PEFCR, there is two aspects. If you talk about a tool which can be created in order to be able to model the work that is happening, you technically go to any footprinting solution provider existing. There is multiple which are active on the sector for different entities. And this one will be using the PEFCRs, will be already implementing as it goes to be able to enable any participant in the technical secretariat to play with it, understand how it works, already try on a couple of its model. And that can be used to be able to draft the PEFCR, how it's going. If it's after what tool are we using to draft a PEFCR? Technically, after we don't use a tool as per se, because we follow the common method of the EF method that gives us the general framework that one has to use in order to create a PEFCR. And from thereafter, we have the final method, which is available. So there is just, if you talk about tool, then coming back to it, this is all type of, there is so many private actors on the market which are creating calculation tool that can take the PEFCR, model it on it, and then typically that's what I represented into a partner. This group will identify potentially one partner to be able to do that as we move forward, and to work on it to be able to use a tool to simulate the draft of the PEFCR created by the technical secretariat. And then after, it will be a bigger conversation that, coming back on the question on the final version, if you do a PEFCR which is officially recognized by the Commission, that means that you give the PEFCR to the Commission. That's what the other sector that I mentioned, the tourism sector, the apparel and footwear sector, the rug sector, and other sectors have done. That means that the final product will be owned by the Commission. If it's a private initiative, there can be plethora of conversation to discuss who owns the IP. Typically, the participant of the work will co-own the IP. How does that work? To which tool do you allow to use it, etc., etc., and many questions can be raised. And Christelle, if I didn't answer your question, please don't hesitate to retype it. I want to make sure that I answer all of the question. After, there is a question about, is a PEFCR for global market or just for the European market? That's a very good question. There is multiple aspects of the PEFCR. The first one is to say that anybody, wherever the production is taking place, is included in the PEFCR. There is zero discrimination in there if the frames are done in one country, if the wood comes from another country, if the metals come wherever it is produced on the globe, it is modeled by the EU PEFCR because it's sold on the EU market. There is, however, a few assumptions which might be EU specific that consider the end of life of the different eyewear. That after will have to be discussed is the most impactful actually of the element. So it's very likely to be insignificant regarding the full environmental footprint. It's actually the case in many sectors where the end of life is not the most impactful, but therefore that's the only EU specific element that you have to take scenarios of end of life which are specific for the EU market. All of the rest is typically completely valid for the global market and is not specific for the EU. The way you model the acetate will not be specific to the EU market. The ingredients don't have to come from EU. So this is all valid for all global players. And I hope I answered this question. Is there more question from any of the participants? Don't hesitate also to raise your hand if you want to ask a question. I'm more than happy to give you the floor if you have a question, or if you want to have more precision on any of the points. Please don't hesitate.
Maybe just a comment while we're waiting if there's another question on the last topic we just talked about, whether it's just EU. So it's the first that will exist for eyewear. I think that's important to say. So it makes it even more compelling and interesting because it's going to be the first time that there will be a definition of product environmental footprint for eyewear globally. And whatever is developed might also then be relevant for other markets.
Thank you, Xenia, for the comment. Is there any other question? Don't hesitate to ask any question about the next steps, about the PEFCR. Don't hesitate to raise your hand or to ask the question on the Q&A section. Because the work, as I mentioned, is that we'll be after sending an invite, following up to be able to ensure we can have the meeting in the 17th of May, to be able to have this work regarding the definition of scope. We'll be also sharing the recording of this meeting to all of the people which have registered and to different participants also that have shared interest into the work. And then after Xenia and I and all our colleagues are available to follow up with all of you on this topic. If you have any questions that may emerge after this meeting or any question that you have after having discussed with your colleagues, to be able to take that further and to be able to take the next steps. So I'm giving a last look at the Q&A segment, and otherwise, again, don't hesitate to raise your hand. Yes, one question, how many people or company do you need to do this project? Do you try to have firm from every country? Very good question. Technically, when you do such a project, according to the EU Commission, you should invite every big player. To make it short, that's one of the requirements normally of the Commission. They don't need to join, but you need to have invited them to be able to make sure that you have sought to have maximum representation. So if I were to tell you, Jeanne, we need 10 people, that would be, I guess, kind of an approx that we would like to have. Do we need to have organization from every country? Not necessarily, but we tend to have diversity. To have different players that may have different type of products representing different materials, different value chain, different approaches. Typically to have somebody from, do we need to have one company from Italy, one company from Germany, one company from France, or things like that? That's not part of the requirement. According to it will be even better, but it's more the diversity of the different participants that we are looking for and the representativity of the different participants, which is a key angle. We'll be also seeking to have companies of diverse size in the meeting to make sure that we have ultimately also, when we talk about the accessibility of the data, that we are able to capture not only what the most sophisticated and advanced company can do, but also what other companies do, because the PEFCR is meant to be scalable at an entire industry, that whatever the size of the glassware company, people are in capacity to be able to implement it. So therefore, that's, again, let's say that we will aim to ideally have 8, 10 organizations to be able to join at the initial of the process. And normally after that's always growing moving forward. And the diversity is indeed a bit on the country, but mainly on the representative and the type of products people are doing, to be able to have the biggest diversity of value chain and materials and processes represented in the work. I hope, Jeanne, I have answered your question. What are your biggest challenges?
Sorry, and one comment on that is we also need to have the majority of the industry, right, to be able to establish.
That's a nice to have indeed, to have the majority of the industry. We need at least to have invited them, but we will aim at having the majority of the industry. Something we don't have to do here. Normally, when we do other PEFCR, the conversation, if it's an official one, we need to have a statement by our monitor about the market share. So that will be a conversation that we can discuss after as we move forward with the project. It also depends on the budget because the raw monitor to discuss market share of a raw monitor is something that comes at a cost. But that will be a conversation that can take place in later in the year once we discuss the scope, the number of participants, because also the more we are, the lesser, of course, the cost is per participants, because typically the cost is rather fixed, and the more participants is very arithmetic after and can help to reduce the burden from the different participants. Very nice question about Anonymous. What were your biggest challenges in facilitating the PEFCR for apparel and footwear? Different challenges here. So ultimately, the key thing to have in mind that anyway, ultimately the project was greenlighted by the EU Commission and ended up by being a success. The challenges after is more into making sure that in different entities, typically the apparel and footwear sector is very fragmented into the fashion on one side, the sport on another side, the luxury on the other side, which are doing complete different type of products in themselves, and they have different value chain and different approaches. So therefore here there was a lot of work to be able to make sure that we can find a common ground between different entities which have very different type of way of developing the product, different type of, not clientele in themselves, but answering different needs of different clients. So that was one of the challenges, but also the beauty of the work, because ultimately everybody agrees. All the decisions are taken is not a consensus based. Normally it's a qualified majority work, but we were always able to find a very good compromise working for everybody while still meeting a strict scientific requirement. But therefore, that was always one thing to accommodate that. And that requires also a lot of calls, a lot of meetings. There is a conversation that takes place globally. There is a conversation one-on-one between the facilitator and different participants to make sure that we can identify together points of improvement and point that will accommodate all of the different parties. That was one of the points. And then other point also, that was the importance of the communication. So it's always important to be able to communicate about this project as it moves along. It's a long project, and the last thing that people want is to be perceived by other players as obscure or by a few big brands coming together to define the rules for the sectors. So it's very important to be very open. And that's something that in this particular case, of course, we will make sure to have anticipated in advance to have a very, very transparent work. But thank you for the question. Any other questions or comments? Again, don't hesitate to also raise your hand. You are welcome to do that. Otherwise, as we mentioned, so please feel free to follow up by sending also messages to Xenia and I to be able to confirm your participation on the 17th of May. We'll automatically anyway send an invite to all of the people which have sent and signed for today's meeting. And we are also going to follow up with many of you individually moving forward. If more questions emerge later on, we are also here to be able to answer. And on this note, I thank you all. Xenia, I give you back the floor in case you want to say a last closing word.
Thank you so much for all this knowledge that you shared and the benchmark from fashion and other industries. I think that was super interesting. We're very excited that this is starting up now in the eyewear industry, and hope that you will all be participating and interested in shaping these standards going forward. And yeah, we would love to invite you all as well to have a look at our study, the Frame the Future Catalyst study. And yeah, we will be following up with you after this call and share the invitation for the next meeting. And yeah, join us. Join Frame the Future, follow us on LinkedIn. We publish every week interesting topics. We will be hosting more webinars on various topics. We will be hosting a webinar on our study and take people through the results of our study as